With Tatum having inconsistent nights, with other guys having off shooting nights, you just have to have more that you can bring to the table than in some games like this one.
Absolutely unbelievable. The Rockets win that game 111-109. Dude, I think for Boston here, I mean, Bill Simmons tweeted tonight how the 2023 Celtics, it's more of a dire situation than people are realizing right now. They have won only 3 of their last 8 games with losses against the Knicks, Nets, Knicks again, Cavs, and now the stinky Rockets. I mean, for Boston here, I mean, this is just one game. It's just a game in March. But I do think overall, we've seen some of the similar issues that we've seen in recent weeks. Marcus Smart just not playing at the same level he did last year, either as the defensive player of the year he was. Offensively, he is really skidding right now. Derek White not closing games for whatever reason. I'm not sure what Joe Mazzulla is thinking there. And Tatum, he has been super inconsistent in recent weeks, Rob. After his, he's leading the Tim Bontemps ESPN straw poll for MVP back in December. He has been tremendously inconsistency more in recent weeks, recent months. With Tatum, is your confidence level in him as the best player on the championship team, or your confidence level in the Celtics as a championship contender wavering at all right now? Or is this just, it's March and let's not overreact here?
I think it's wavered a bit, but it's been more gradual than that. It hasn't all been in March, right? There's been a noticeable offensive aggression or regression that's been happening for a while with them that's a little bit concerning. But also to your point about Marcus Smart, there's just a little bit of a loss of edge. And when you're playing, undersized in some lineups or at some positions to begin with, when you're, games like this are a perfect example. Like guys like KJ Martin are going to make you earn it in a way. Like the Rockets are not a a particularly organized team, honestly. And some of that is guard play, some of that is coaching, some of that is just
such a nice way of saying it.
We're trying to be kind today. But they do have guys who are going to play with force and energy, especially some Atari Eason is going to show up and make a pop, right? KJ Martin is going to push in transition and attack you and make sure that you're set. And if you're not, he's going to get layups. If you're a team like the Celtics that walks into a game like this one expecting to win it, I just don't know that they have the lineup and the roster that's equipped to do that. Like if they're not bombing away and hitting a disproportionate number of their threes, they have to earn it against a lot of teams, right? Like they just don't have the kind of structure or even the kind of talent base. Like they are really, really good 8 or 9 deep, better than almost all the teams in the league in terms of depth. But at the top, at the middle of the roster, like with Tatum having inconsistent nights, with other guys having off shooting nights, you just have to have more that you can bring to the table than in some games like this one.
They are 47-22 right now. They were 35-12 on January 22nd, which means they're 12-10 since then with some really bad losses over that stretch. Over this, time period, they are 16th in offensive rating, 6th in defensive rating. They were earlier in the season, in the middle of December, 21-5. At the time, their defense was not as amazing. They were like an unbelievable all-time great offense, as you said, with their 3-pointers. But offensively, they've just been more average since early December, especially since late January. A lot of that is due to, regression, like you said, with 3-point shooting. Part of it is inconsistency with Tatum. I think we talked about De'Aaron Fox as one of the league's most efficient isolation scorers this season. Tatum, I mean, I love Tatum. I've always loved Tatum. I think he is a top 5 MVP candidate. He's one of the best players in the world. But it's not like, I think sometimes when we talk about Tatum, we act like he's Kevin Durant on offense. He's not. Like if you look at the 25 most frequent isolation scorers this season on Second Spectrum, he's 17th in efficiency of all of them. Just for context, the top 3 is Dame, Kyrie, and Durant. He's not that level type of guy, right? So I think with Tatum, that's one of my hesitations with him of saying, oh yeah, he's definitely a top 5 player. He's a top 5 MVP candidate, but he's not a top 5 player. And I think in games like tonight, the last play, he misses that wide open layup. It's a weird play call by Joe Mazzulla. Jaylen Brown has 43 points in the game, and you're giving Tatum an ISO when he was like not that great tonight at all. Brown was awesome. He's the only reason why they even pulled themselves back into the game. Mazzulla, this is some prove it time for him, man. They have been so much more inconsistent. Celtics fans are growing very frustrated with his lack of timeouts, with his end game decisions, some of the play calling, the lineups and rotations that he's throwing out there. I feel like he's the guy. If you talk about like Boston sports talk radio, Mazzulla's going to get the blame more than anybody. Right after he just signed his actual deal to be the full time head coach, no more, doesn't have the interim tag anymore.
Well, especially if you flash back to as you mentioned, to earlier points in the season when the Celtics were just ripping off wins. I mean, he looked like a coach of the year frontrunner, especially with all of the turmoil, everything they were doing or dealing with as an organization, as a franchise, everything that they were trying to do, just in terms of like trading out one coach for another at that stage in the season. It's very challenging. And yet, in the same way that Jayson Tatum has slid back in the MVP race, which to go from being a front runner that early for MVP, and the MVP is a notoriously anchored award. Like whatever happens at the beginning of the season has a tremendous impact on the overall outcome of the voting. Like we set our opinions early. Those opinions get reinforced over time. They get fed into the cycle. Usually guys in Jayson Tatum's position, if they just like held serve basically over the course of the whole season, would go on to win. The fact that he is basically out of the top 3 for the MVP, as you mentioned, a top 5 candidate, which I think is totally fair. But there's a reason we don't talk about him with Joel and Jokic and Giannis, right? Like there's a demarcation line, and then you get into guys like Tatum. And Mazzulla, like for everything he did well to get the Celtics on track early, for everything that was going well for that offense, I think it's pretty telling that as we tried to explain in November and December why the Celtics were at this historic offensive rate, it was, well, I mean, their ball movement looks better. The threes look pretty good.
Drive and kick. It looks beautiful.
Malcolm Brogdon, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, these are not sufficient explanations for how last year's Celtics became the best offense of all time. And we're seeing they're still very good. Like, they're still a top 5 offense in terms of like leveling out over the whole season. Still a top 5 offense. But they're just not what they were earlier in the year. And they're going to have to kind of rearrange bits of their identity to compensate for that.